Welcome to Hill Center. Thank you so much for coming this evening for the third episode of Hill Center Stage, featuring Rebecca Sheir, who is the wonderful, intriguing host of WAMU 88.5's Metro Connection, heard Friday at 1 and Saturday at 7. Is that correct? Anyway, it's a wonderful show, and I encourage you to tune in. And Rebecca is also an actress. We couldn't be more pleased and proud this evening than to host the John F. Kennedy Center for the Performing Arts president, Michael Kaiser, who I think it's safe to say has had an absolutely storied and fabled career. And in 2 weeks, he is leaving to become the head of the DeVos, I'm probably mispronouncing that, Institute at the University of Maryland School of Arts Management. And I won't go into all of the various remarkable aspects of his career because I know that Rebecca will do that. But please join me in welcoming Rebecca Sheir and Michael Kaiser.
Thank you.
So, Michael, I've prepared a list of questions, but you and I were just chatting before we started, and I'm not going to use this for the time being.
Okay.
You just told me that you've been up since 4 a.m.
Every day.
That's not an anomaly. This is a regular thing.
This is what I do. I'm crazy. You'll learn that over the next hour, but I can confirm it early.
So what is this morning routine you have every day?
Get up at 4, spend an hour working, go to the gym, run 5 miles, shower, walk to work, and have my first meeting with my marketing director every morning at 6:30.
How does your marketing director feel about that?
He volunteered. I mean, I was there and he was there, and so we just got into this routine of having our morning meeting. Marketing's obviously a big, important for all arts organizations, certainly for the Kennedy Center, and we have so many different performances we're selling at so many different at the same time, and so much to go through. So every morning at 6:30 we do that, and that's our first half hour of the day.
And please tell me you sleep in on the weekends.
I do sleep in until 6 o'clock on the weekends. Yeah.
Wow. Well, that leads me then to my first question on the sheet. I've done a bit of research for this interview, and there's a Post article about you from August 2013. It talked about how at that point, you'd arrived at the Kennedy Center in 2001, 12 years later. The author, who shall remain nameless, referred to your overextended double life. So 2 things. Talk to us about that double life. And do you really feel that's an accurate word? Are you overextended?
No. I don't have a balanced life, I'll admit to that, but it's not overextended. I've had 2 jobs for these last 13 plus years. One was to be the president of the Kennedy Center and to be responsible for the selection of the art and for the marketing and the fundraising, the financial management, et cetera, of running our national cultural institution. And the second was starting and then running the DeVos Institute of Arts Management. I started it on my arrival in 2001 in Washington at the Kennedy Center, and we renamed it 4 years ago to the DeVos Institute. But I'm very passionate about the field of arts management. It's a young field, and I believe that the problems we have in the arts are not related to a dearth of great singers or dancers or theater directors or choreographers, but the lack of really skilled, trained, talented people to run the institutions that employ these artists. And so my passion in life is to train people to do what I do. So I have had a double life in the sense that I've been doing both jobs at the same time, but they truly inform each other. Being the president of the Kennedy Center makes me current about what the arts environment is and what it takes to run a successful arts organization. And running the DeVos Institute and working with so many arts organizations around the country and around the world gives me great ideas to bring back to the Kennedy Center. I have never felt overextended, but I do get tired.
But you yourself didn't really have official training in arts managing, did you?
I had none. I always say that the board that offered me the first job, which was running the Kansas City Ballet, really had no business giving me that job. All I had been was I had been on the board of the Washington Opera here in Washington. At that point, it was not the Washington National Opera, it was just the Washington Opera. I'd been on their board for 2 years. I was trained as an opera singer. That was it. And but I was offered this job running this ballet company because it was about a week from bankruptcy, and no one else wanted the job, and I did. So they had an easy choice. It was me or nobody. And I had to learn on the job, and it was a true learning process. And I maintained my deep friendship with that organization. I go back to Kansas City very often, and I'm so grateful that everyone allowed me to learn on the time of this wonderful ballet company.
We're going to talk about the opera singing in a moment, because I don't know if a lot of people know that about Michael Kaiser. Maybe he'll even sing for us. Or not. But you have performed these amazing financial feats, turning around these organizations. Your nickname has been the Turnaround King. Do you have one that you were proudest of?
They're all different, and I think the Royal Opera House was the hardest one. I ran the Royal Opera House in London just before coming to the Kennedy Center. I arrived at this institution. It had a $30 million deficit, and we were in the midst of renovating the beautiful Royal Opera House. This was November 18th of 1998, and I was told that on December 1st of 1999, the Queen of England was coming for the reopening. And all of where we were was a mud puddle at that moment. The building was by no means finished, and we didn't have the money to pay for it, and we had a $30 million deficit. But no one cared about that. They just said, the Queen is coming, you will finish by the 1st of December of next year. And it was a very, very big challenge. The organization was deeply distressed financially, and the press in England was extremely involved and engaged in the failures of the Royal Opera House. And it was almost a national joke at the time. There are 11 major newspapers in England, and almost every day there was a front page story in at least one of them about what a bunch of idiots the people at the Royal Opera House were. And I had to change public opinion. I had to raise an awful lot of money. I had to finish the building. I had to open an opera house. And I basically had 12 months. So that one I think was the toughest one, and the one that I'm really proud of in terms of how hard it was. But each of the organizations that I turned around, I mean, there were 3 before that. The Kansas City Ballet, which is now fully functioning and recently opened a beautiful new building dedicated to ballet in Kansas City. The Alvin Ailey American Dance Theater, one of the great cultural institutions of America, that literally was about to close. And it's been a joy to present them every year at the Kennedy Center. And American Ballet Theater, a great ballet company in New York, which we also present every year at the Kennedy Center. So it's been wonderful to be able to maintain these relationships. Each of those turnarounds is meaningful. Each of them built families, and I feel part of those families, and I still feel very close to them.
But with each one, once you turned it around, when did you feel like it was time for you to move on?
It's a really good question and a really important one. A journalist in the New York Times once called me famously restless because I would run an organization for a few years, turn it around, and leave. And it wasn't restlessness. It was a requirement. I do not compare myself to Moses, please, but if you know your Bible, you know that Moses led the Israelites through the desert, but he never went to the promised land. Outside the promised land, he turned it over to Joshua, and he sort of wandered off and died. And he did that because he knew that he wasn't the right leader for the promised land. He was the right leader to get the Israelites to the promised land. And again, I'm not comparing myself to Moses, but the same thing is true in a turnaround. When you've been through the stress of a turnaround, it is remarkably stressful. It is physically painful because you so want the organization to survive and thrive, and you see the light, but you have to figure out how to get there, and it takes skill, and it also takes luck, and it takes a lot of people to believe in you and in the institution. But when you do that, and when the deficit's gone, and when the organization's ready to go into the promised land, you can't be that right leader because you're too conservative. You remember the bad times too much. You're too scarred by them. And you need someone to come in who's fresh and energetic and only knows about the great history of the organization and is ready to do great things. You have to step back. And so it takes discipline, because in each of the organizations that I turned around, I was in love with that organization and with the people, with the artists, with the staff, with the board, with the donors. You know, I still have deeply great friends at each institution that I managed, and leaving was painful, but I also knew it was the right thing. You know when the turnaround's finished, and you know when it's time for the whole institution to turn forward and look forward rather than look backward. And at that moment, you have to exit.
That makes sense. Talking about Alvin Ailey, I was reading an interview you did a couple of years back, and you told a really interesting story of how one of the ways you knew Alvin Ailey was in trouble. And it has to do with the author of
Alex
Roots.
Haley.
Yes.
Yeah. When I got to Alvin Ailey and I did my interviews, I was saying to the organization, first of all, I'll use a technical term, the earned income ratio, which you should know about. Earned income ratio is simply this: what percentage of the income of the organization comes from ticket sales or tour fees, earned income versus contributed income. And when I got to Alvin Ailey, they all bragged to me. They were going bankrupt, and I knew that, but they said, but we have such a great earned income ratio. We earn 75% of our income. Only 25% is contributed. And they were bragging about this like this was some great feat. Unlike most other organizations, which are closer to 50% or 60%, they were 75% earned. And I said, all that means is you're terrible at fundraising. You know, you need to be better. You need to do a better job at fundraising. And they said, well, we raise $1.7 million every year, and that's all the money you can raise at Alvin Ailey. That's it. I said, well, that's not enough for an organization of your stature. And they said, if you think you can raise more than $1.7 million, you're crazy. They said, you can't do that. Only $1.7 million. They said, we're so famous, everyone knows us, and everyone's heard of us, and that's how much we can raise. Well, I didn't quite believe that, but I didn't argue too much because I wanted the job. So I got the job, and shortly after I arrived, the author Alex Haley died. You know Alex Haley is the author of the book Roots. And here everyone was telling me how famous Ailey was, and yet we got thousands of letters of condolence because people thought Alex Haley was Alvin Ailey. And what that taught me was, A, that we weren't so famous, and B, you know, all of us in the arts have a heightened belief in what people think or know about our organizations. We always think we're so famous. And yet, it's astonishing how many people in America thought that the person who wrote Roots ran a dance company. And that truly we had to make ourselves more famous. So I had created this field which I call institutional marketing, which is different from the traditional arts marketing we're used to. It's not the brochures or the emails or the posters. This was, how do you make people feel really that an organization is so exciting, so special, so amazing? And I embarked on a very aggressive institutional marketing campaign for Alvin Ailey. A, to get people to realize we didn't write Roots, but B, to get them to feel excited about us. And we put this program in place, and within 1 year, our fundraising doubled. From that $1.7 million that they raised every year for a decade to $3.4 million. And there were no big gifts. It wasn't like someone dropped $1 million on us. This was just a lot of people wanting to participate in the Ailey organization. And it taught me a lot about how famous we aren't, how we have to create our impression, and how we create this institutional excitement around an organization that makes people want to join us. And that's been something I've now duplicated at every institution, including the Kennedy Center.
These are all such positive things. So tell me why in Great Britain with the Royal Opera you earned the nickname the Crass American?
Yeah,
What's up with that?
Yeah, my title in the press was Michael Kaiser, the Crass American. Well, they also called me Mary Poppins and Mystic Meg and all kinds of other things, which I didn't understand who Mystic Meg was, but I understand she's a character there. I was called Michael Kaiser, the Crass American, because I inherited an organization with a $30 million deficit and an organization that had to raise a very substantial sum to finish the building, so when the Queen came, it was there. And so I did a lot of fundraising, and fundraising, private fundraising back then was not very common in England. Really, it was not very common in most of the world besides the United States. And people were slightly offended that we raised $100 million in 18 months. And that made me crass because I talked about money a lot because we didn't have any.
And with the rest of the world, the reason why private isn't so high is because they get government funding for the arts.
That's right. I mean, the tradition in the world was first the church and then governments. And government funding the arts is not all that old. It's really since the beginning of the 20th century that governments funded the arts. Before that, it was the church. Then the government started to fund the arts, and so we have government funding really throughout the earth. We don't have a lot of government funding in the United States. This sounds like a joke, but it's true. It's because we were founded by the Puritans, and the Puritans thought music and dance were evil, and we had a separation of art and state from the beginning of our country. And I'm not saying it's good, and I'm not saying it's bad. I'm just saying it is. What's happening around the rest of the world, unfortunately, is that governments are not able anymore to fund the arts the way they had. And what's happening is that there are major cuts in arts, government funding for the arts in almost every country of the world right now. And it's a very scary time for the arts outside the United States because there hasn't been a culture of philanthropy around the arts, and yet the government is cutting the funding. And so those two things together means that arts organizations don't know how to cope. And so you see an awful lot of problems in arts organizations across the globe right now. And frankly, one of the reasons why my DeVos Institute is an international organization, why we teach around the world, is we're trying to help organizations in crisis all across the globe who are facing this very difficult situation of losing some or all of their government funding, but not knowing how to build a private funding base. And so we're introducing the concept of private fundraising in many countries around the world, and it's, I think, a very important step. I think over time, there will still be more government funding in other countries than in the United States, but not quite as much as they were used to traditionally.
You tour the world quite a bit, spreading this gospel of training arts managers and teaching fundraising, philanthropy. Is there a particular locale you visited where you were surprised by how you were received?
I'll give a good story and a bad story. The good story is how was my visits to throughout the Muslim world. I've done an awful lot of work in the Arab countries. I've done a lot of work in Pakistan. Astonishing interest in arts, in supporting arts institutions, let's say in Pakistan, where I've done a lot of teaching, and tremendous openness to the ideas that I teach. I love teaching in the Muslim world. The not so great experience was in France, where I taught in Paris. One of my wonderful donors, Laura Pels, owns a beautiful theater called the Théâtre L'Atelier in Paris. And she asked me to come and give a speech about fundraising and the American way of fundraising. And I couched it in the context of the world because I do a lot of teaching around the world. And I told my story about the Puritans, and I talked about how it's a little bit of an embarrassment in America that we have so little government funding. And I talked about what we do about it and what they might want to think about, because the French government is cutting back on the funding of most arts organizations about 4 to 6% every year. Over time, that's sizable. The theater was filled. It was tremendously well received. You know when you give a good speech, and you know when people like it and ask fun questions, and everyone was cheering. And it was great, and I went home feeling so proud of myself. And I got a call from Laura about a week later saying, the French government, there was one person from the French Ministry of Culture here, and he says you can never come back and teach in France again. He said, because your entire speech was about why America is better than France. And unless you let him come to the Kennedy Center and make a speech about why France is better than America, you're not invited back. Needless to say, I've never taught again in France. But yeah, so I've been received differently in different places.
Yeah. Wow. Now you've published your thoughts and your savvy about arts management in 3 books. The Art of the Turnaround, 2008, Leading Roles from 2010, and The Cycle in 2013. By the way, is it true you wrote one of them on your BlackBerry?
I did. I wrote our leading roles, 50 questions every arts board should ask, and I wrote that on my BlackBerry. I was doing a tour of the United States. This was right after the stock market crash of the September of 2008, after Lehman Brothers went bankrupt. And I was extremely nervous that arts organizations were going to pull in their horns, get so conservative that they were going to become uninteresting, and they were going to get into really bad shape. So I decided to do a tour. I went to all 50 states, plus Puerto Rico and the District of Columbia. I went to 69 cities in total. And it wasn't continuous. I would go to make a speech and come up, go and come back, go and come back, for about 14 months. And I was on the road so much, in so many hotels, in so many airports, in so many airplanes. And I just decided to write this book, and I wrote it on my BlackBerry. And I would write each one as an email and send the email back to my office and get home and edit them, and that became the book. But yeah, I did write the draft on my BlackBerry.
That's amazing. Carpal tunnel, not an issue?
No. And don't take away my BlackBerry, all I can say.
Tell us about the cycle. What is the cycle?
The cycle is what has become my overriding concept of what creates success in the arts, and it's really simple. It starts from what the most important thing for being successful as an arts organization is creating really amazing art. Or let me say programming, because some arts organizations do more educational programming. But if the art is exciting, and I use the word surprising, my goal every year when I announce my Kennedy Center season is to surprise people. I want to do something that some people say, how did you think of that? That to me is really critical. If the art's really interesting, surprising, wonderful, engaging, and then if you market that art really well, and again, I'm talking about the marketing to sell tickets, what I call programmatic marketing, and the institutional marketing, the marketing to get people to go say, wow, that's an exciting institution. When you do great art and great marketing, people want to join what I call the family. And when I talk about family, I don't mean the family of artists or staff, those who are paid by the organization. I'm talking about the people around the organization who do stuff for us, who buy our tickets, who buy our subscriptions, who volunteer, who serve on our boards, and who contribute money. That to me is the family. So when the art's really great and the marketing's really aggressive, people want to join your family. That was Ailey. The art was wonderful, but we had to do that institutional marketing really well for more people want to join our family. When the family is happy and engaged and loves the institution, they produce money. When that money goes back into great programming, which is marketed well, the family gets happier, more engaged, bigger, more diverse, more wonderful, and you get more money that you can get put back into programming. And it's that cycle that characterizes healthy arts organizations. And what's so fascinating to me, having worked with and continuing to work with so many sick arts organizations, is the first thing that arts organizations cut when they get a little bit of a financial problem are art and marketing. Art, because they say we should spend a little less on the art. Marketing, because no one's going to notice. Well, when you cut the art and the marketing, your family loses a little excitement, gets a little less engaged. There's lots of other places to spend your money in this world. Give your money to other institutions, and your family starts to go away, and you have a little less money to put in your programming. So then people cut a little more of their art and their marketing, and the family gets less interested. And this goes on and on and on until you become sort of irrelevant. And that's unfortunately the story we see of the New York City Opera, right? The New York City Opera had financial challenges, serious challenges, had to be addressed. They chose to address them by doing less work, by leaving Lincoln Center to becoming itinerant. And when they did a little less work, and when they left Lincoln Center, a lot of their family members left. So they had a little less money, so they did a little less art, and they marketed less, and they had less family. And they got to the point where their family was so tiny that no one was going to keep them alive. And so my teaching, as simple as it sounds, is about the opposite. Is how do you get arts organizations to plan and develop really interesting work? How do you really focus in strong marketing? And how do you present such a welcoming image, that you pull people to the institution, that you make them feel really welcome in the institution, so that they join your family and stay in your family and help get you resource. That to me is really as simple as it sounds, what one has to do as an arts manager.
Do you think there's a point in that sort of downward spiral in the cycle where it's just too late? Or is everyone turnaroundable?
I believe anyone who does interesting art is turnaroundable. And the reason I believe that is because in the arts, no one lends us that much money. We can't get into that much debt. We can't become, a Citibank or something like that. We can't become General Motors. We can't owe hundreds of millions of dollars. No one will loan it to us. We're lucky to get someone to loan us $10, So we can't get into that big a hole. So I am very optimistic. The Royal Opera House was, I think, the sickest arts organization I ever observed. And within 2 years, the deficit was gone. And they had a new opera house, and it today is one of the healthiest, most vibrant arts institutions on the earth. And the turnaround ended just 14 years ago. It's not that long. So yes, I'm extremely optimistic about the ability to turn around any arts organization.
So are those British journalists now kicking themselves for calling you the crass American?
Oh, I've been called so much. Later on, I was called a moron by the BBC. No, they're still saying bad things about me sometimes.
Well, I want to.
You learn to develop not a thick skin, but a thicker skin in this job.
Well, let's talk about Michael Kaiser, the man. We've been talking about sort of the turnaround king. Obviously, your professional life and your personal life are very much intertwined. But I want to go back to your early exposure to the arts, because you come from a pretty artsy family. Can you talk about your parents, your grandfather?
Sure. My grandfather was he wasn't, I got no genetic material, I have to say. He was my grandmother's third husband. My father's stepfather was a violinist in the New York Philharmonic Orchestra. He was hired by Toscanini in 1934 and retired 40 years later under Boulez in 1974. But he was the only grandfather I knew, and he was my grandfather, and I grew up going to New York Philharmonic concerts. Back when the New York Philharmonic performed at Carnegie Hall, the dress rehearsals were on Saturday mornings, and we were allowed in as family members. And so I got to hear the most astonishing performances for many years, to the point that I still can't tell always the difference between which number Tchaikovsky's two symphonies are, but I can sing you the whole thing. It was just ingrained in us. And my particular interest was singing and theater and musical theater and opera. But I grew up in this very musical home, and I was very fortunate. And my parents, neither one with much musical talent, but were very interested also in theater and particularly visual arts museums. So I grew up in a very cultured home and was very lucky. And my parents loved the musical theater. And when I was 4 years old, they were taking my brother and sister to their first Broadway musical. And I assumed that I was invited, even though they had not bought me a ticket. So when it was clear to them that I thought I was going to, they bought an extra ticket, and we went to see The Music Man with Barbara Cook. And I sat there. I remember every moment of the whole musical. I was 4, and when Marion the librarian sings "Goodnight, My Someone," she's standing on the little porch of her house, and the house was a scrim, the material that you can see through when there's a lid behind. We didn't have such high-tech things back then, and this is 1957, and all of a sudden you could see into her house, and there was Amaryllis playing the piano. It was magic, and I was hooked. And now it's 40 years, it's now, 56 years later, and Barbara Cook works for me at the Kennedy Center and curates our cabaret series. And I tell the story to her all the time because it always makes her cry, and I love to make her cry. But Barbara Cook is the reason I'm in this profession. There's no reason. She sang "Goodnight, My Someone," and you could see into her house. And, to me, the arts are magical, and they remain magical. And the joy of my career is opening up that magic for lots of other people.
You mentioned the fact that you'd be able to sing all of the Tchaikovsky. I won't ask you to do that now.
No.
But you were interested in opera singing, and yet you went to MIT.
Yeah. I really wanted to be an opera singer, and I just wasn't very good. I just wasn't good. I hoped to be good. I just really wasn't. And I knew it in the back of my head. And so I had the choice to go to a conservatory, to Eastman Conservatory, to Oberlin, or to go to MIT, and I picked MIT. And then I wavered, and I'm one of those unhappy children. I went to 4 undergraduate schools, drove my parents crazy. But I was really on a journey, to figure out what I wanted to be and what I could be. And interestingly, I ended up at Brandeis as an economics and music major, but my undergraduate thesis was about regional opera companies, and I was proposing that opera companies should share productions, which of course they do all the time now, but they didn't back then. But I used economic theory to show why it made sense for opera companies to share productions. And so I went on this journey, and I'm lucky it went relatively quickly and painlessly for me, not for my parents. And I got to arts management, pretty quickly.
But before then, you were in the corporate world for a bit?
I was. There was no jobs in arts management, and there was no career back then. There was no training. There were no university programs. There wasn't a field. There were people who ran arts organizations who traditionally were somehow failed performers or conductors or whatever, somehow had fallen into that profession, but there was no way to get into it. There was no path. And so coming out with my undergraduate degree in economics and music, I got a wonderful job in the economics world and ended up in a consulting business and ended up starting my own consulting business, and then got invited to the Washington Opera Board and realized at the age of 31 that I really didn't want to do my consulting anymore. I wanted to run an arts organization. I was the worst board member in the history of the Washington Opera. Everyone will agree to that. Poor Martin Feinstein has since passed away, but he would certainly agree to that, because I really wanted to be a staff member, not a board member. And I realized that. And so that's when I sold my business to my business partner and got this job through a client at the Kansas City Ballet, at the bankrupt Kansas City Ballet. So it took me about 8-9 years to figure out that I needed to get into arts management, and I found a path into it.
What do you see, speaking of being a board member, or a bad one at that, what do you see a good board member doing and being?
Board members have 5 key responsibilities, and they're pretty simple to describe and hard to implement. They're there to help develop and approve and oversee the implementation of a strategic plan. They're there to understand and approve the annual budget. They're there to hire, fire, compensate, and motivate the people who report directly to the board. They're there to help with the fundraising, and they're there to serve as ambassadors for the organization. Everything a board member does falls into those 5 key areas. What I find is because we tend to focus our boards only on money, we really turn great potential board members into dissatisfied board members really well. And we as arts managers need to do a better job of engaging board members and making it fun and interesting and rewarding, and not sit there talk about cash flow 90% of the time.
The Kennedy Center has a really interesting board in terms of the makeup. Can you talk about that?
Yeah, it's an unusual board. I always tell the people I'm teaching now, don't ask me about my board, because we're not a good example of anything, because our board is not self-appointed the way most boards are. Our board is appointed by the President of the United States and the leadership of Congress. We have 14 members of Congress on our board. They are appointed by the leaders of Congress. All 4 leaders of Congress sit on our board. We have 3 cabinet secretaries, 6 other ex officio members, and 36 presidentially appointed members. None of them have an obligation to have ever been in the Kennedy Center before, to care about what we do, to come to a meeting or to give any money. We have no requirements. We're not allowed to. So it's an unusual board. Most boards require their board members to do something. We are not allowed to do that. But we have the same job to motivate and energize our board as anyone does. And I'm very proud of the fact that the board of the Kennedy Center is so productive, so helpful, so lovely, so generous, but they have no obligation to be so.
Interesting. Well, now that we're talking about the Kennedy Center again, you're about to see a big change. So what exactly is going to happen in the next few weeks?
In 18 days, I walk out of my office for the last time. It'll be very emotional. It's my home, and it's been a great, wonderful time for me. Amazing staff, amazing donors, amazing audiences who support us. But it's time. I believe that an organization like the Kennedy Center, a major presenting organization, really should have fresh eyes and vision every decade or so. It shouldn't go much past that. I was originally meant to leave at the end of 2011, which would have been 11 years, so sort of decade-ish. But that year, the Washington Opera was having some substantial trouble, and we had to bring it into the Kennedy Center. And I simply could not merge with the opera and say bye. And it just wasn't fair to anybody. And my board chair asked me to stay for 3 more years, which I was happy to do. And so that's why my tenure is a little longer than I would really recommend. But it's really important that, Deborah Rutter, who's a fantastic arts manager, has been running the Chicago Symphony for the last 10 years beautifully. She's going to come in with her own vision, her own idea, her own thoughts, her own priorities, and she's going to make the Kennedy Center not change it 100%, just start focusing on some other things, which is fantastic. And that's what an arts organization needs to be. It needs to be living and surprising, and not be the same every year, the same. So I will walk out the door, and I'm taking the DeVos Institute of Arts Management with me because it's really my little baby, and I'm moving it to the University of Maryland. And we will continue to do the work we do, which is we train arts managers and board members around the world, and around the country. We consult with arts organizations that need in-depth help. We have fellowship programs for American and for foreign arts managers who come and work with us and study with us. And at the university, I'll be able to add a 4th component, which over the next couple of years, I'm going to develop a master's program in arts management at the University of Maryland, and I'll teach that. And so all of this will be housed at the University of Maryland, and we start work there 3 weeks from tomorrow.
Will you keep waking up at 4 a.m.?
Absolutely.
Well, at this point, I would love to turn the talk over to the audience and see if we have any questions. Are we using a microphone, or can people just call out? All right. So yeah, right here in front in the stripes, please.
Do you know the date when this new addition to the Kennedy Center is going to be on the south side? That's already funded, isn't it?
The new addition that we've been working on the south side is mostly funded. The campaign we set for that building was $125 million. We've raised about $110 million, so we're very close to the end. We have a long approvals process that we're in the midst of. If any of you have done construction in Washington, it is a challenge. And then you can multiply it by a few factors of 10 when you're a presidential memorial. So there's many approvals we have to receive, and that approvals process will go on over the next year or so, hopefully. And then we hope the building will be open sometime in 2017 or 18. So that addition, I think, is going to be a wonderful addition for the center, and we hope to have open 3+ years from now. But that depends on the approvals process, and one can't pre-guess how that's going to go.
How about on this side, right here in the front?
Did the Corcoran Gallery contact the DeVos and you for any kind of assistance?
No.
Do you have any idea what might be done with the Corcoran?
I don't want to inflame a case that's currently before the court. Let's just say I tried to be helpful. I offered to be helpful, let me phrase it that way, years ago, several times. It's a very sad situation to me because I never like to see an arts organization go away. I much prefer arts organizations to stay independent of each other. We had to take over the opera. That was not my preference. It was not my favorite scenario. I like organizations to stay independent because they can focus truly on their aesthetic, their art, and everyone has a different aesthetic, and that's what makes the arts ecology so rich. And so it's sad for me when an arts organization goes away.
Right here in the blue.
There's been a good deal of press and discussion about the graying of the audience for traditional arts institutions. And I'd appreciate your comment on that phenomenon.
Sure, I'm happy to talk about it. Number one, let me say that you can read accounts from the 1890s that say classical music's about to end because our audience is so old. And I think there's a reason for that. I've been searching that most of my career. And I think there's a sociological trend, which is, this is a traditional trend, and I'm going to talk about today a little second, but let me talk with traditionally. Children would be introduced to the arts as children in school and by their families. They would participate in the arts until they hit puberty. Then they start to date. And many, many young people lost their interest in the arts 15, 16, 13, 14, 15, 16 years old. Not everyone, not people like myself for whom the arts was a passion, but a lot of people who were more casually interested stopped participating in the arts. They started to think about their careers. They might have gone to college. They might have started a family. When they were young adults, they had very little discretionary time and very little discretionary money with young kids. And so they didn't participate much in the arts. And then as their children left the nest and as their careers did well, when they got to be in their 40s and their 50s, they would start to come back into the arts because they had more discretionary time and more discretionary money. It's why the arts were always a little grayer, because we always had this new group coming in who were in their middle ages, coming into the arts and replenishing those who left the earth. So we constantly had a steady flow. And we lived like that happily for a century. The problem now is we don't have arts in our public schools anymore, very much, not enough. And so we don't have the young children necessarily getting interested in the arts and being educated in the arts. And they have so many other forms of entertainment that they start learning at. They play on an iPad before they talk now. So I'm mostly worried about 20 years from now. I'm worried about who's going to be that 40-year-old 20 years from now who's going to come into the arts and be my board member or be a donor. So that's something I really do worry about. And we see the beginning of this with the donor base. Our donor base is a little older than the population at large. And we see a lot of donors who are starting to give the decision about funding to their children. And in a lot of cases, the children are not making the same funding choices as the parents. And in a lot of cases, they're not giving to the arts. It's the first evidence I have. It's a very scary trend. I've just finished a book, not on my iPad, that's coming out in January about the future of the arts in America. I look 20 years from now and predict what I think the arts will be like. And it's sort of a depressing book. It ends with an optimistic chapter about what we can do to fix it. I'm a very, very big believer in systematic arts education. I've spent a lot of my time at the Kennedy Center working in arts education. I created a program called Any Given Child, which is meant to address the problems in arts education, and it's now installed in 14 cities in America. We have 1 million children in schools that have Any Given Child. I'm hopeful that we can start to reintroduce a systematic arts education in a not expensive way, in a realistic way. But it does scare me. And I am worried that we won't have an audience in 20 years. I'm worried that we won't. I'm not worried so much, to be honest, for the Kennedy Center. I'm worried more for the mid-sized regional arts organization and who've really created, we've had an explosion. Those of us in this room, we lived through an explosion in arts accessibility in the second half of the 20th century, where every city in America has a symphony or a theater company, a museum, ballet company, some group of arts organizations. Arts are available to literally everybody in this country. And I worry about what it's going to be like in 20 years if it's not, if live arts are not available, because I know how inspiring they were to me. And by the way, the book starts and ends with my Barbara Cook Good Night, My Someone story. So if you read it there, you'll know, you heard it first.
Let's go to this side of the room, in the back in the bow tie.
Thank you. Kennedy Center is commended for making arts available at a reasonable cost. No stage program, etc. My concern is for the next generation and also for the person who follows you. Do you envision there being renewed efforts to provide, to make the arts available at a reasonable cost? Things are getting much more expensive.
This is a real problem in the arts. One of the biggest problems we face is ticket pricing. It's a bigger problem for us as a business because of all these substitute forms of entertainment. 2 orchestra seats at the Metropolitan Opera, $600. For that, you can buy a home computer and watch Leontine Price and Montserrat Caballé and Renata Tebaldi on YouTube forever for free. And people are starting to make that comparison. And it's a very serious issue. We've tried to address it, as most arts organizations have, in a variety of ways. I'm particularly concerned with younger people, and we started a program called MyTix. It's a special website and program for people, millennials, people in their 18 to 30 years old, who can get discounted tickets and can have special promotions and such to come and see performances. Because I'm worried that this is the first generation that didn't have systematic arts education. We try many different, we have our Millennium Stage, which every day has a free performance. I've worked very hard to improve the quality of those. Particularly, if you haven't been to what's called the Conservatory Project, I really suggest you do that. It's something I started about 10 years ago now, but we now do it every year. It's 2 weeks a year, where the Millennium Stage takes place in our Terrace Theater, which is a much smaller theater with a better acoustic, and where every night we bring the best students at the best conservatories from America. So one night is Juilliard, one night is Curtis, one night is Oberlin. It's a great program. If you haven't ever come, you're going to hear the next generation of classical music stars, but you hear them just when they're in their last year of college. But we've tried to take the tickets. But just listen to this statistic, and this is, I'm not blaming the Metropolitan Opera when I give you this statistic, but it's just true. In 1960, the ticket that is today $300 is $10. It was $10 in 1960. It's $300 today. That's a factor of 30 increase. Inflation went up only a factor of 8. And ticket prices went up a factor of 30. Why is that? Because as arts organizations grew, as we started to pay more and more people for more and more weeks of work than we could afford and that we could raise money for, we tried to balance our budget on the basis of ticket prices. And every year our ticket prices would go up more and more faster than inflation. And so today our ticket prices are huge, and it's a serious, serious issue. And the problems you're seeing at the Metropolitan Opera today with their union negotiations, this is all about those issues. The age of the audience, the ticket prices, how you raise money. It's extremely serious and difficult. It's not a simple problem. And no one person is to blame.
How about in the back there? Yeah, sir. Yeah.
The only reason I'm not facing more is if I face this way, I don't talk into the mic and you can't hear me. And I have a cold today. I'm sorry. That's better. Thank you.
Theatrical productions at the Kennedy Center. What are the considerations that go into mounting your own production or its own productions as opposed to being a booking house for every
Thank you. When I came to the Kennedy Center in 2001, we had not created our own production in 14 years. A Few Good Men was the last production created at the Kennedy Center. And then we only had touring presentations for 14 years. When I came to the Kennedy Center, it won't surprise you when I talk about my cycle, I said, we have to do work that is unique to us. Not only because I think that's what makes health, but also Congress has called us the National Cultural Center, and I felt we weren't really acting fully like the National Cultural Center if we didn't have art that was special and unique and contributed something. So I decided we had to start producing our own. I had the crazy notion of doing 6 musicals by Stephen Sondheim in the same time. Was our first return in 14 years to producing theater. And frankly, we would just look we only did revivals until until a month from now, because I didn't think we were ready to do. I thought we had to learn. So I want to do revivals. I want to do revivals that weren't done to death. I want to do something where we had something important to say, or we felt we had a group of artists who had something important to say. And so it's been a process of finding those right pieces. I think some we did were amazing. Some we shouldn't have done, or we should have done better. That's art making. I'm particularly proud of the Sondheim celebration in the summer of 2002. I'm particularly proud of our Tennessee Williams Festival a couple of years later. I thought our Glass Menagerie with Sally Field was one of the great things we've ever had on our stage. I'm particularly proud of our August Wilson cycle. When August Wilson passed away, everyone was talking about how do you do his cycle. August Wilson wrote 10 plays. Each one took place in a different decade of the 20th century. And how do you do all 10 in some kind of meaningful way? If you do them as full productions, by the time you rehearse and put them on, no one's going to remember the first one by the time we did the last one. So we decided to do them as readings with a group of actors, all of whom had done his plays before, a group of directors, all in 1 month. It was an astonishing month. You could see you saw the entire 20th century through the eyes of this great playwright in 1 month. It was really an amazing, amazing time. I'm very proud of our revivals of Ragtime and Follies, both of which went to Broadway. Together got 14 Tony nominations. And now Sideshow, our last revival under my tenure, which is a beautiful show, is almost a new show. It's not a new show. I said, let's try one step between revival and new. It's 50% new. And we'll go to Broadway, and we'll open this fall on Broadway. And now the show I put together, but painfully will not be there to manage, is Little Dancer. We got to Little Dancer because a producer that was interested sort of lost interest, and the artist who created, Susan Stroman, who you may know as the woman who directed and choreographed, produced the producers and Contact and many, many others, is directing the show, and it's created by the team that made Ragtime, Lynn Ahrens and Steve Flaherty. And they all came to me and said, help. This is a few years ago. And so I love the topic. It's about the Degas sculpture of the Little Dancer. That the only one that he himself touched, I believe, is sitting in the National Gallery. There are copies of it all over. And it's a story of his life and the way he met this young girl and her family. And I think it's really going to be beautiful. And that will be the first world premiere musical that the Kennedy Center has produced in a very, very long time. But it's always with an eye towards something that we can do that's interesting. Ragtime hadn't been revived and is a wonderful show. Follies had not been revived on Broadway, but had some regional revivals. But I could get Bernadette Peters, and anytime you can get Bernadette Peters, you do. And so, we really, it's a lot of discussion, a lot of thinking. I work on my major productions 3 to 5 years in advance. All of our major projects, our big international festivals, are programmed are conceived 5 years in advance. I believe that one of the big problems, I'm sorry, I need to talk back in this. One of the big problems that arts organizations have is they plan their art too close into the event. And because they do that, they can only go to donors they know to fund them. So they keep going back to the same donors over and over and over and over again. And that's why their fundraising doesn't grow. So I plan my major projects farther in advance, which gives you time to really think them through and make them wonderful, to do joint ventures with other organizations, but especially to find new donors who may care about that particular project. And as a result, our fundraising at the Kennedy Center has about tripled in the last 14 years, which is a very difficult 14. If you think of the economies, my first year was 2001, 9/11 happened in my first year, and then we had the stock market crash of 2008. But we've built our private fundraising from about 28 million in 2001 to about 83 million this past year. So that growth, I believe, has come simply because of that cycle. And more people are excited by the work we do and the range of work we do. And so that all figures into our thinking as we create which production to produce.
Back to anyone on this side of the room? Just trying to go back and forth, but okay, right in the middle.
Two questions. How do you feel about the broadcast of operas in movie theaters? And secondly, of the things that you tried for, what didn't work, and what do you think you learned from that?
Great questions. Movie theater opera, it's a huge part of my new book. It's a very exciting technology. It's the first major change in arts distribution in a very long time. And as a result, I think it's going to have a major impact on what the arts world looks like in 20 years. I'll tell you what I mean. I believe the movie theater broadcasts, which are wonderful, they're wonderful. I think pretty soon they'll be in our homes, not in the movie theater. I think you're going to have channels at home on your computer where you can watch the Royal Opera House or the Met or La Scala or the Mariinsky or the Bolshoi Ballet, and you'll have these amazing opportunities. And I think it's going to make it very hard for the mid-sized regional company to survive. Because for $10 or $15, you'll be able to watch the Bolshoi Ballet, or for $60 or $70, you'll go to your mid-sized regional company. And more people, particularly young people who grow up thinking watching on the internet is as good as seeing something live, will make the choice to watch it live at home. And so I think we're going to see an arts ecology with the biggies and with the smaller, mobile, local organizations, and a hole in the middle. It saddens me. I love the broadcasts. I think they're going to have a major impact on the world, on the arts ecology. The second question you asked was, I forget. Oh, I tried. I'll tell you, this concept of institutional marketing has been with me for a while. I'll tell you about my very first month at the Kansas City Ballet. One of my board members realized that our marketing wasn't very strong, so he was kind enough to pay a marketing consultant to work with us for a while. This was a man who'd had a lot of success with some local sports teams in Kansas City. And he came up with this idea, like it was going to be a teaser. It was going to be a question: what are the most valuable 52 feet in Kansas City? And Kansas City is a city with a lot of real estate development, so everyone was supposed to think this is about real estate. And we were going to place this ad everywhere, and everyone was going to be asking, what are the most valuable 52 feet? And then the answer was going to come: it was the dancers of the Kansas City Ballet. Well, we didn't have a whole lot of money to spend in the campaign. And so the big thing we had was this big sign over the highway. And of course, the day we put it out, it rained and the sign ripped. And we had this little ad in the newspaper, which no one read. And no one cared about the most valuable 52 feet in Kansas City. We spent all of our marketing money for that fall program on that. And we had I have the distinction, the worst attendance in the history of the Kansas City Ballet was my first series of performances. Now, I have a good excuse. The Kansas City Royals, our baseball team, was also in the World Series that week. But truly, I screwed up. And I learned a lot about when one does a marketing campaign, the weight you have to place behind it, or don't do it at all. Ditzy doesn't work in marketing. And so I learned an awful lot by that failure. But it was a big failure. But if I could say the good thing is, I was so mortified that I then did something smart, one thing smart there. I made a relationship with the Girl Scouts, and we created a merit badge, a ballet merit badge, and you had to go to the ballet and answer some questions, and fill out this book and do this stuff, and we gave discounted seats to the Girl Scouts. And the next set of performances, we sold out in the first time in the history of the Kansas City Ballet. And one of my board members came up to the window at the last minute to buy a ticket and couldn't because it was sold out, and she was so angry. And I said, you should be happy it's sold out, not angry you couldn't buy a ticket. But we changed the paradigm by selling out. But I learned about how you do marketing in that big fiasco.
How about over here in the glasses?
Social media can be used very well for both. I'm a huge believer I sound like I'm negative about the internet. I'm a huge believer in the power of the internet, and we have to harness it, and social media is crucial. The thing we can't do is let Twitter, we can't say, and some arts organizations are doing this, all we have to do is tweet and we're done. That's not enough. 140 characters isn't enough to get across a message, particularly about a new work of art, something that's challenging. We have the great joy now of having the internet, having websites. When I started in this business, we didn't have that. I didn't have web for Kansas City Ballet or for Ailey, and only at the very end of ABT. It's made it so much easier to sell new art. I think one of the reasons why people are always saying, why is new opera doing so well now? I think one of the reasons it's doing so well is now we can talk about it. It was too expensive. In an ad in the newspaper this big in the New York Times, you couldn't say anything substantive. But now we can have excerpts of the work of the composer, and we can have video, and we can have costume sketches. We can show so much. So I'm a huge believer in all the social media, and it changes every day what's in and what's out. You have to keep current. You have to have young people that you work with, because us old people are always like 2 steps behind. It's only old people now who are joining Facebook, anymore. Like Facebook's so 2012, But yes, I really believe that social media fits into both the selling of the tickets and the creating of the excitement around the organization. But you have to use them wisely, and you can't overload people with email blasts. And if you over-tweet, people stop paying attention. So there's rules that we're learning. We're just learning really how to use them well, but I think they're hugely important.
How about right there?
Hello.
Hi.
As you survey the current American arts landscape, are there any organizations that surprise or inspire you with the work they're doing, not just in programming, but in managerial practice?
So many. I learned so much from my peers. I'll talk about one project. When you think about the arts capitals of the world, you don't think about Grand Rapids, Michigan. But one young man who was, after 2009, after the market collapsed, after the bankruptcies in Michigan of the car companies, was really tired about all the discussion about the economic problems. And he wanted to enliven Grand Rapids. And he came up with this wonderful project called Art Prize. And what Art Prize is, you're shaking your head, you know about Art Prize? Art Prize was a simple concept. He said anyone who wants to come to Grand Rapids for this 2-week period can come and can show a work of art that they made. And I'm going to create a platform, a web platform, that allows people to vote for their favorites. And whoever wins gets a prize. And then he went to all the public buildings, all the office buildings, everywhere, and said, will you donate use of your space for these 2 weeks? And in the first year, 1,500 artists came to Grand Rapids and hung paintings and drawings, mammoth sculptures. One person released 2,000 paper airplanes from the roof of the tallest building in Grand Rapids. All different art installations. There was a sea serpent in the river. I happened to be there to see it. Everywhere you go, and it's been going on now for about, 7 or 8 years now, everywhere you go in Grand Rapids for those 2 weeks, people are talking about contemporary art. Every restaurant is booked. Every hotel room is booked. The whole community walks around with these booklets to, did you see this, did you see that, this is my favorite, that's my favorite. They now also have a panel of judges, of arts experts come and vote for their favorites, which are always different from the crowd favorites. It's such a great community engagement story, isn't it? It was such a simple concept, and it's made Grand Rapids into this wonderful contemporary art city. And I love that program. But yes, I see great work being done. I see great managers in so many cities. What's been missing in our field is codifying what's great. It's been left to the talent of the individual arts manager to be wonderful and talented. Though it's been left to the individual board member to be a great board member. And what I'm trying to do with my work is to codify some of this. Not everything I write about did I invent, but I'm trying to put it down. I'm trying to have it be so that people can learn. And hopefully 10 years from now, and 20 years from now, and 30 years from now, they know so much more, and they do it much better than I know how to do it. But I'm trying to start to codify this field so that we actually can teach people, so that artists have a much more secure home for their work than they've been suffering from, frankly, in the last 20 years. That's really what my personal mission is.
Well, please join me in thanking Michael Kaiser for coming and joining us tonight.
Thank you. Thank you all.